The legendary actor Robert Redford, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood in the 1970s. We have just had it confirmed that Robert Redford has died.
When Robert Redford passed away, the world mourned a legend. But behind the headlines lies a story even more shocking. The fortune he leaves behind is massive, complex, and deeply personal. And insiders say it has already stirred tears, tensions, and tough choices within his own family. How did one of Hollywood's most iconic stars amass such wealth? And why is it causing heartbreak for the people he loved most? Stay with us to know. The quiet sunset over Sundance.
I just bought 2 acres in 1961. Bought 2 acres of land for $500.
You did?
And then I had to wait for 2 years before I could get the money to build my own house, which I did.
Robert Redford spent his last years surrounded by the mountains of Utah at his beloved home in Sundance. This place was not just a house. It was a dream born out of childhood struggles and the need for space where he could breathe. As a boy in Los Angeles, Redford often spoke about watching neighborhoods change and the green spaces he loved being swallowed by concrete. He once admitted that losing those open places left him restless. Owning land in Sundance was his way of reclaiming what he had lost as a child. He first bought the property in the 1960s, long before it became famous. At that time, it was just rugged land and simple cabins. He put his savings into it because he wanted a home that felt like a sanctuary. Later, he would say, "I built Sundance to be my place of quiet. I needed a place where I could listen to myself think." The mountains and pine trees gave him that silence. This was not the mansion lifestyle of many Hollywood stars. It was a retreat tied to his identity as both an artist and a man shaped by hardship. As time moved on, the world began to notice the signs of his retreat from the spotlight. He announced his retirement from lead acting in 2018, saying he wanted to focus on directing and other passions. The shift wasn't abrupt. For decades, he had poured his energy into the Sundance Institute, championing independent filmmakers, and he had given equal devotion to environmental causes. Neighbors and friends often recall seeing him walking the trails, pointing out trees and streams with the same reverence he once gave to camera shots on set. Redford passed away in his Sundance home, the place he had protected and nurtured for half a century. The mountains stood as silent witnesses, holding the man who had once declared this land his refuge. News spread quickly, and while tributes poured in from Hollywood and beyond, attention soon shifted toward what he left behind. His family found themselves facing not just the grief of losing a husband, father, and grandfather, but also the staggering reality of the legacy and fortune he left in their hands. What exactly is the fortune he amassed, and why does its sheer size stir more than gratitude among those closest to him? Let's find out. How big is that fortune?
Robert Redford bought 6,000 mountain acres up here and named the place after his first big movie role, Sundance.
By 2025, estimates placed Robert Redford's net worth at around $200 million, a staggering figure that reflected not only his acting career, but also the careful choices he made beyond the screen. Much of that wealth began with film. In the late 1960s and 1970s, Redford was one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, commanding salaries that matched his box office power. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, and All the President's Men were not just critical triumphs, but also financial successes that secured him steady back-end profits. Unlike some actors who earned a fortune only to lose it quickly, Redford was deliberate. He treated each paycheck as an opportunity, setting aside money not just for luxury, but for longevity. Directing and producing added new streams of income. Ordinary People, his directorial debut, not only won Oscars, but opened doors to a career behind the camera. Those fees, combined with producing credits tied to films under the Sundance umbrella, created layers of income that few actors could match. Still, insiders often note that his greatest financial move wasn't in Hollywood at all. Real estate became one of Redford's most powerful tools. The ranch near Sundance, Utah, which he first purchased in the late 1960s for a modest sum, became a centerpiece of his life and fortune. The sprawling property now spans hundreds of acres of protected land, complete with lodges, cabins, and trails that he personally oversaw. At the time of his death, estimates suggest the ranch alone could be worth over $20 million, though its true value is tied as much to its conservation status as to its market price. Beyond Sundance, he owned estates in Napa Valley, including a vineyard property reportedly worth $15 million, a Malibu beachfront home valued at roughly $12 million, and multiple residences in Manhattan, including a penthouse in the Upper East Side that has been appraised around $10 million. Some properties were sold over the years at significant profit, but Redford retained others with the purpose of creating retreats for family or safeguarding natural landscapes. He had an eye for places that would grow in value, one longtime friend remarked, but he never approached it like a tycoon. He approached it like an artist, choosing spaces with soul. That perspective extended beyond land. Redford's investments included fine art, rare collectibles, and other tangible assets. Reports indicate he owned paintings and sculptures valued collectively at over $5 million, carefully curated over decades. These were not just decoration. They reflected his tastes, passions, and the people and places he cherished. It wasn't just bricks, land, and art. Redford's intellectual property, tied to his films, Sundance brand, and other creative ventures, added another layer of wealth. The Sundance Film Festival, while not built to be a cash machine, enhanced the Institute's influence and turned his name into a lasting cultural imprint. Earnings from film royalties and residuals likely contribute several million more annually, though exact figures are private. These assets give his family not just financial wealth, but cultural and creative influence that extends well beyond box office numbers. Analysts suggest that a significant portion of the $200 million fortune comes from these investments, rather than raw salary. Acting laid the foundation, but directing, producing, real estate, art, and intellectual property cemented his long-term financial security. For his family, the numbers are awe-inspiring and daunting. This is not just about a bank account. It is about assets that carry memories, meaning, and sometimes responsibility. Every property holds personal history. Every piece of art reflects decades of taste and thought. And every institution tied to his name carries expectations. With such wealth comes questions. Who are the rightful heirs? And how will this fortune be divided? To find its answer, we first need to look at the family structure of Redford. The family ties, love and loss. Behind Robert Redford's fame and fortune lies a family story marked by deep love, heartbreaking loss, and an enduring sense of legacy. His marriages, children, and grandchildren were not just chapters in his personal life. They were part of the very fabric of who he became. Redford married Lola Van Wagenen in 1958. They were young, almost too young by their own admission, but their bond carried them through decades. Their marriage lasted until 1985, nearly 30 years, in which they built a family together. With Lola, he had 4 children. The first, Scott, died in infancy around 1959, a tragedy that scarred them both. Redford later admitted that the pain of losing a child never fully faded, and it influenced the way he approached fatherhood. His second son, James, was born in 1962, followed by Shauna in 1960 and Amy in 1970. The children grew up in the shadow of fame, but also in the warmth of a father who tried to balance Hollywood with real family life. James, known to many as Jamie, took after his father's artistic and activist streak. He became a filmmaker and writer, co-founding the Redford Center, a nonprofit dedicated to environmental storytelling. His death in 2020 from bile duct cancer was another devastating blow. Friends say Robert never quite recovered from losing him. He lost a collaborator, but more than that, he lost a piece of himself, one family friend reflected. Shauna, Redford's oldest surviving child, became an artist. She built a quieter life away from the spotlight, yet her work reflected the creativity she grew up surrounded by. Amy, the youngest daughter, followed most closely in her father's footsteps. She became a filmmaker and actress, speaking in interviews about how the nomadic and creative life she witnessed as a child inspired her to tell stories of her own. There was always a sense that art and nature were not separate, but connected, she once explained. The family has always carried the emotional weight of its losses. 2 children gone, Scott in infancy, James after building a full life, and 2 daughters carrying on. That kind of grief can either break families apart or bind them more tightly. For the Redfords, it seems to have done both at different times. Each child, in their own way, held on to part of Robert's vision. James through activism, Amy through film, Shauna through art. The legacy is not only financial, but deeply personal. In later life, Redford found love again with Sibylle Sagers, a German artist. They had been together for many years before marrying in 2009. For those who saw them together, Sibylle was more than just a partner. She was a creative companion. They shared a love for painting, music, and nature, often collaborating on artistic projects. As Redford aged, her presence became a source of calm and stability. She is widely expected to play a central role in the inheritance of his estate, not only because she was his wife, but because she was at his side through his final decades. Now that we know who's in the family, let's tell you surprising details of what legal and financial mechanisms determine who gets what. The will, the heirs, and the hidden clauses. Reports suggest that his widow, Sibylle Sagers, is the primary heir. The two had built a life together for over a decade, and she was his closest companion during his final years. As an artist herself, Sibylle shared his vision of blending art with nature. It makes sense that much of his estate would pass to her. Yet, those close to the family note that Redford was not a man to leave things simple. His estate likely carries clauses ensuring that Sundance, environmental projects, and conservation efforts remain funded and protected. Trusts and charitable bequests are also believed to play a large role. Redford spent much of his life ensuring that land around Sundance would remain untouched. Conservation easements that he set up will keep thousands of acres safe from development, but they also mean those assets cannot simply be sold for profit. Likewise, the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival may continue to benefit from dedicated funds written into his estate. For his family, this means that not everything he owned can be inherited in a traditional sense. Some parts of his fortune are permanently tied to the ideals he held dear. On the financial side, complications are almost certain. His real estate was spread across several states, from Utah to California to New York. Each state has its own rules for inheritance and taxes, which can delay the settlement of an estate. Then there are royalties from decades of film work, intellectual property rights tied to his name and image, and possible foreign assets through projects abroad. Untangling this web could take years, even for a well-prepared estate. The emotional side may be even more difficult. Divorce, the loss of 2 children, and the blending of a second marriage create a complex family history. Grief can often sharpen feelings of entitlement or resentment. Rumors have already surfaced of quiet disagreements within the family about how the wealth should be divided. Some believe more should go directly to his surviving children and grandchildren, while others feel Sibylle, as his wife, deserves to carry the bulk of it. These are not unusual tensions when a fortune this large is involved, but they can cause wounds that last longer than any legal battle. Redford's will seems to be less about splitting numbers on a page and more about balancing love, loss, and legacy. The assets are vast, but so are the emotions tied to them. What each person receives will matter less for its dollar value and more for what it represents. A bond with a man whose life was bigger than the screen. But what kind of fortune is more than just money? And how might some parts tear at family relations even more than others? More than dollars. Robert Redford's wealth was never measured only in dollars. From childhood, he understood the value of preserving the world around him. Growing up in Los Angeles, he watched green spaces vanish as neighborhoods and freeways replaced them. "I saw a city that I really loved disappear under my feet. Connection to nature hit me like a ton of bricks. Want to preserve it," he once told the United Nations. That sense of responsibility stayed with him throughout his life, shaping not only his activism, but also the way he built his fortune. The Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival were the most visible expressions of that commitment. Redford created them to champion independent voices, to give young filmmakers a stage they might never have otherwise. In interviews, he emphasized that he wanted his children to inherit more than money. They were to inherit stewardship. "I hope they understand what this really is," he said. "It is not about the dollars. It is about the stories, the ideas, the community we build here." Those words suggest that part of his estate carries obligations as much as value, a weight that comes with privilege and responsibility. Many of Redford's personal items, properties, and art were also tied to principles rather than profit. Some of his land was protected by conservation easements, meaning it could not be sold or developed freely. Other pieces of art and collections he held closely for sentimental or cultural reasons. Friends recall him saying, "Some things are not for money. They are for keeping the world a little better than we found it." These holdings may not generate income, but they carry upkeep, legal obligations, and the challenge of preserving a vision he had spent decades refining. Redford's philanthropic commitments, environmental work, and cultural influence cannot be passed along as cash. Family members inherit expectations to continue his causes, uphold his name, and act with integrity. It is wealth that enriches in ways money cannot, but it also requires care and sometimes sacrifice. And finally, how will this fortune shape the family's future? What tensions, what healing, what surprises await? The quiet tears of what's left behind. When Robert Redford passed, Hollywood and the wider creative world paused to honor a man whose influence spanned generations. Meryl Streep called him a guiding light, both on screen and in life, while George Clooney said, "He taught us how to use our influence for good." Jane Fonda reflected, "He was a rare soul who balanced courage with kindness, talent with integrity." Directors also spoke of his lasting impact. Alejandro González Iñárritu described Redford as a quiet force whose work inspired generations to tell stories that matter, highlighting how his legacy went beyond acting to shaping how films could make a difference in the world. Tributes poured in from actors who had worked closely with him. Paul Newman's longtime collaborator, in a statement shared by friends, remembered Redford as someone who never let fame define him and who always stayed true to his principles. Younger actors, too, expressed admiration, noting that his commitment to independent film and mentorship at the Sundance Institute opened doors they could never have imagined. Even across borders, filmmakers acknowledged his influence, portraying Redford as a beacon for creativity, responsibility, and dedication to causes larger than himself. These collective voices underscored not just his professional accomplishments, but the human warmth and guidance he offered to everyone who crossed his path. For his family, the loss was intensely personal. His widow, Sibylle Sagers, had shared decades of creativity, travel, and quiet companionship with him. Friends say she was his anchor in his later years, and now she must navigate both grief and stewardship of his estate. The 7 grandchildren are beginning to understand what it means to inherit not just a name, but a vision and a responsibility. Some are drawn to artistic pursuits, others to environmental causes, each finding ways to connect to their grandfather's values. Yet, with such inheritance comes the awareness that carrying forward Redford's work is more than opportunity, it is duty. For the family, tears may not always be for the loss of the man they loved, but for the weight of what he entrusted to them. The emotional impact is tangible as they navigate grief alongside stewardship, striving to honor both his memory and the responsibilities of his fortune. Despite these challenges, Redford's legacy offers opportunity. His heirs now have the chance to continue his work, sustaining the Sundance Institute and Film Festival, advancing environmental causes, and preserving his artistic and philanthropic projects. Amy has already pursued film projects inspired by her father's vision, and Shauna continues her work in art. Each choice will shape not only their inheritance, but also the future of the Redford name. Ultimately, Redford's fortune is both blessing and burden. It brings privilege, influence, and resources to continue work he cherished, but it carries the weight of duty and expectation. Sometimes, the tears left behind are not just for the man who passed, but for the responsibilities he entrusted to his family. What do you think about Robert Redford's incredible journey, his fortune, and the legacy he left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below.